I proposed to my girlfriend of 3 years, but found out she was already married. If you love real-life stories from Reddit, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. 3 years of love, laughter, and what I believed was an unshakable bond. I was ready to take the next step, to make her mine forever. Little did I know the day I planned to propose would be the day my world came crashing down. It was supposed to be perfect, a grandiose proposal with all our families there to witness the moment. But instead of a tearful yes, I got a shocking revelation that would change everything. I had been planning this proposal for months. As an entrepreneur, I'm used to thinking big, and I wanted this to be the most memorable day of our lives. I rented out a beautiful garden venue, decorated it with thousands of twinkling lights, and even hired a string quartet to play our favorite songs. Our families flew in from different parts of the country, all hidden away until the big moment. I had the ring, a stunning diamond that cost me a small fortune, and I was ready to pop the question. The day started off perfectly. We spent the morning together, just the two of us, enjoying a quiet breakfast at our favorite cafe. She had no idea what was coming. I kept my nerves in check, reminding myself that this was the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. We had talked about the future, about building a life together, and I was confident she felt the same way. As the evening approached, I told her we were going to a special dinner. I blindfolded her on the way to the venue, playing it off as a fun surprise. When we arrived, I led her to the center of the garden, where our families were waiting, hidden just out of sight. I removed the blindfold, and her eyes widened in shock as she took in the scene around her. "Surprise," I said, dropping to one knee. The string quartet began to play our song, and I pulled out the ring. "I love you more than anything in this world. Will you marry me?" For a moment, everything was perfect. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears, and I thought I saw the answer in her expression. But then something shifted. Her face went pale, and she took a step back. I can't," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, frozen, the ring still in my hand. "What do you mean you can't?" I asked, my voice trembling. She looked around, her eyes darting to our families, who were now emerging from their hiding spots, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. "I'm already married," she blurted out. The garden fell silent. The string quartet stopped playing, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. "What?" I managed to choke out. She took a deep breath, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know how to tell you. I was married before we met, and I never got a divorce. I thought it didn't matter, that we could just be together without it being an issue. But now, I can't marry you." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. All the plans, all the love, all the trust, it was all a lie. I looked at her, searching for some explanation, some sign that this was just a horrible joke. But there was nothing but guilt in her eyes. Our families were in shock, murmuring amongst themselves. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. But I didn't know what to do. I just stood there, holding the ring, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. "How could you do this to me?" I finally asked, my voice breaking. "We've been together for 3 years. How could you keep something like this from me?" She shook her head, tears still falling. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't think it would matter. I love you, but I can't give you what you want." I felt a surge of anger, but it was quickly replaced by a deep, aching sadness. I had given her everything, my heart, my time, my money. I had built a life with her, thinking we were in it together. But now I realized she had been with me for my earnings, for the lifestyle I could provide. She had never truly been mine. I turned to our families, who were still standing there, unsure of what to do. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely audible. "I didn't know." And with that, I walked out of the garden, leaving behind the shattered pieces of what I thought was my future. The ring felt heavy in my pocket, a constant reminder of the love I had lost, or maybe the love I had never really had. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. The thought of walking into the apartment we shared, surrounded by the life we'd built together, felt like stepping into a minefield. Instead, I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind racing through every moment of the last 3 years, searching for signs I'd missed, clues I'd ignored. How could I have been so blind? How could I have trusted her so completely? Eventually, I ended up at my best friend Jake's place. He opened the door, took one look at my face, and didn't ask questions. He just handed me a beer and let me sit in silence for a while. When I finally told him what happened, his jaw dropped. "She's married? Like legally married? To someone else?" he repeated, as if saying it out loud would make it make sense. It didn't. The next few days were a blur. I stayed with Jake, avoiding my apartment and my phone, which was blowing up with calls and texts from her, my family, and hers. I couldn't bring myself to answer. What was I supposed to say? "Sorry, Mom. The love of my life has been lying to me for 3 years, and I just wasted a small fortune on a proposal that turned into a public humiliation? Yeah, no thanks." But eventually I had to face the music. I went back to the apartment, and she was there, waiting for me. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her eyes red and puffy from crying. The moment I walked in, she started apologizing, her words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate rush. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice shaking. "I was going to tell you, I swear. I just didn't know how. And then we got so serious and I didn't want to lose you. I love you, I really do. But I was scared." I stared at her, my arms crossed, my heart hardening with every word. Scared of what? Losing the lifestyle I gave you? The money, the trips, the security? Because, let's be real, that's what this is about, isn't it? She flinched like I'd slapped her. "That's not fair," she whispered. "You know it's not just about that." "Do I?" I shot back. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been using me this whole time. You're married, for God's sake. Married. And you never thought to mention it? Not once in 3 years?" She didn't have an answer for that. She just stood there crying while I packed a bag with enough clothes to last me a few weeks. I couldn't stay there, not with her, not in that apartment that suddenly felt like a stranger's home. As I headed for the door, she grabbed my arm. "Please," she begged, "don't leave like this. Let's talk about it. Let's figure this out." I shook her off. "There's nothing to figure out. You lied to me for 3 years. That's not something you just figure out." And with that, I walked out, leaving her standing there alone. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into work. As an entrepreneur, I had the luxury of burying myself in projects, and that's exactly what I did. I launched a new product line, negotiated a major partnership, and basically worked myself to the point of exhaustion. It was the only way I could keep from thinking about her, about us, about the life I thought we were building together. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the questions kept creeping in. Who was she really married to? Why had she never mentioned him? And why had she stayed with me for so long if she was already committed to someone else? I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them from her. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. His name was Greg, and he came highly recommended. I gave him the basics, her name, her birthday, the fact that she was supposedly married, and within a week he had a full report for me. Sitting in his office, flipping through the pages, I felt like I was reading about a stranger. Her husband's name was Daniel. They'd been married for 5 years, but they'd been separated for the last 4. They hadn't lived together since before she and I met, but they'd never officially filed for divorce. According to Greg, Daniel was a struggling musician who lived in a tiny apartment on the other side of town. He had no idea she'd been in a serious relationship with me. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. All this time, she'd been living a double life, and neither of us had known. I thanked Greg, paid his fee, and left with a heavy heart. I didn't know what to do with the information, but I knew I couldn't just let it go. A few days later, I decided to pay Daniel a visit. I didn't know what I was hoping to achieve, but I needed to see the man she'd chosen over me, even if it was only in the past. His apartment was in a rundown building, the kind of place you'd expect a struggling artist to live. When he opened the door, he looked confused but not unfriendly. "Can I help you?" he asked, squinting at me. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I'm here to talk about your wife." His face went pale. "What about her?" "You mean you don't know?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "She's been living with me for the past 3 years. I just found out she's still married to you." Daniel's jaw dropped. "What? No way. We've been separated for years. She told me she was single." I handed him the report from Greg. "Looks like she's been lying to both of us." He scanned the pages, his expression growing darker with each line. When he finally looked up, there was a mix of anger and sadness in his eyes. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "I had no idea." "Neither did I said. "But now we both do, and I think it's time we did something about it." Daniel and I sat in his cramped living room, the air thick with tension and disbelief. It was surreal, sitting across from the man who was technically my girlfriend's husband, both of us reeling from the same betrayal. He poured us each a drink, cheap whiskey that burned on the way down, and we started talking. "She told me she wanted space," Daniel said, running a hand through his messy hair, "that we were better off apart. I thought she was just done with me, done with us. I never imagined she'd move on like this with someone like you." I raised an eyebrow. "Someone like me?" He shrugged. "You know, successful, stable. I'm a musician, man. I barely make rent most months. She always wanted more than I could give her." I leaned back, processing his words. It was starting to make sense now. She'd left Daniel because he couldn't provide the life she wanted, and she'd latched onto me because I could. It wasn't about love, not really. It was about security, about climbing the ladder, and I'd been too blinded by my own feelings to see it. "So what now?" I asked, swirling the whiskey in my glass. "You just let her keep living this double life?" Daniel shook his head. "No way. I'm done being her backup plan. If she wants a divorce, she can have one, but I'm not letting her walk away without consequences." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of solidarity with this man I just met. We were both victims of her lies, and we both deserved answers. "Let's confront her," I said. "Together." She needs to know she can't keep playing us like this. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then nodded. All right, let's do it. We met her at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop downtown. She looked shocked when she walked in and saw the two of us sitting together, but she quickly masked it with a nervous smile. What's going on? She asked, sliding into the booth across from us. We know, I said, cutting straight to the point. About Daniel, about your marriage, about everything. Her face went pale and she glanced between us, her eyes wide with panic. I can explain, she stammered. It's not what you think. Then tell us, Daniel said, his voice firm. Because from where we're sitting, it looks like you've been lying to both of us for years. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. I never meant to hurt either of you, she said quietly. I was young when I married Daniel. I thought I was in love, but I wasn't. And when I met you, she looked at me, her eyes pleading. I thought I finally found what I was looking for, but I didn't know how to end things with Daniel. I didn't want to hurt him. So you just didn't? I asked, my voice rising. You strung him along while you built a life with me? Do you have any idea how messed up that is? She flinched, tears welling up in her eyes. I know it was wrong. I know I should have told you both the truth, but I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. You lost me the second I found out you were married, I said, my voice cold. And you lost him the second you decided to lie to him about us. Daniel nodded in agreement. You can't keep playing both sides, her name? It's not fair to either of us. If you want a divorce, we'll do it. But this, he gestured between the three of us, ends now. She looked down at her hands, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never meant for any of this to happen. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said, standing up. You need to figure out what you want, but don't expect me to be a part of it. I'm done. Daniel stood too, and together we walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her sitting there, alone with her guilt. It was a harsh ending, but it was the only way forward. Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding my life. I moved out of the apartment we'd shared and into a new place, one that didn't have any memories of her attached to it. I threw myself into work, channeling all my anger and hurt into my business, and slowly, piece by piece, I started to heal. Daniel and I stayed in touch, oddly enough. We weren't friends exactly, but we had a mutual understanding. We'd both been burned by the same person, and that created a strange bond between us. He filed for divorce, and she didn't fight it. I guess she realized she couldn't keep up the charade anymore. As for her, I didn't hear from her again. She moved out of the apartment and out of my life, and I was okay with that. I didn't need closure from her. I'd found it on my own. It's been 6 months since that day in the coffee shop, and life has changed in ways I never could have imagined. At first, the pain was all-consuming. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my mind racing with questions I knew I'd never get answers to. How could someone I loved so deeply betray me like that? How could I have been so blind? But as time went on, the sharp edges of that pain began to dull, and I started to see things more clearly. I threw myself into my work, launching a new venture that quickly became one of the most successful projects I've ever undertaken. It was my way of reclaiming control, of proving to myself that I was more than just the guy who got played. And it worked. The business took off, and with it, my confidence began to return. But it wasn't just work that helped me heal. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my relationship, realizing how much I'd isolated myself in my pursuit of what I thought was the perfect life. Jake, my best friend, became my rock during those early months. He never let me wallow for too long, dragging me out to bars, concerts, and even a spontaneous road trip that ended with us camping under the stars. It was during those moments that I remembered who I was before the lies, the betrayal, the heartbreak. I also started therapy. At first, I was resistant. I didn't want to sit in a room and talk about my feelings with a stranger, but my therapist, Dr. Patel, quickly became one of the most important people in my life. She helped me unpack the mess of emotions I'd been carrying around, anger, sadness, shame, and guided me toward forgiveness. Not for her, but for myself. I had to let go of the guilt I felt for not seeing the signs, for not protecting myself. It wasn't my fault that she lied. I had loved her, and that wasn't a crime. One of the hardest parts of moving on was dealing with the fallout with our families. My parents were devastated when I told them the truth. They'd loved her, welcomed her into our family, and the betrayal hit them almost as hard as it hit me. But they rallied around me, offering support and love when I needed it most. Her family, on the other hand, was a different story. They reached out to me, apologizing for her actions and begging me to understand that they'd had no idea. I believed them, but it was still hard to face them. Eventually, I sent them a message, thanking them for their kindness, but explaining that I needed space. They respected that, and we haven't spoken since. As for her, I heard through the grapevine that she moved to another city. I don't know if she's with someone new or if she's alone, and honestly, I don't care. She's no longer a part of my life, and I've made peace with that. The anger I once felt has faded, replaced by a quiet sense of relief. I dodged a bullet, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. The biggest surprise in all of this has been the way I've grown. I'm not the same person I was when I proposed to her that day in the garden. I'm stronger, more self-aware, and more cautious with my heart. But I'm also more open. I've learned that not everyone is going to hurt me and that love, real love, is worth the risk. A few weeks ago, I went on my first date since the breakup. Her name is Claire, and she's nothing like my ex. She's kind, honest, and refreshingly straightforward. We met at a networking event, and she made me laugh in a way I hadn't in years. It's still early days, but for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. I'm not rushing into anything. I've learned my lesson there, but it's nice to know that my heart isn't as broken as I thought it was. Looking back, I can see that the proposal disaster was a turning point. It shattered the illusion I'd been living in and forced me to confront the truth. It hurt like hell, but it also set me free. I'm no longer tied to someone who didn't deserve me, and I'm no longer chasing a fantasy. I'm living my life on my own terms, and for the first time in a long time, I'm happy. So, to anyone out there who's been through something similar, know this: it gets better. The pain fades, the wounds heal, and one day, you'll wake up and realize that you're okay. More than okay, even. You'll find yourself again, and when you do, you'll be stronger than ever. As for me, I'm finally ready to close this chapter of my life. It's been a wild, painful, and ultimately transformative journey, but I've come out the other side. And who knows? Maybe one day I'll find someone who loves me for me, not for what I can provide, but for who I am. Until then, I'm content with where I am. I've got my business, my friends, my family, and most importantly, myself. And that's enough. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more.